What's up everyone, Jackson Riley here, and we need to talk about something that's been bubbling under the surface of the Indiana Fever locker room for months. Something that finally got confirmed in the most unexpected way possible. You know how sometimes the truth slips out when people think they're just making casual conversation? Well, Sophie Cunningham just did exactly that. And what she revealed about the veteran dynamics around Caitlin Clark isn't just tea. It's a full confession about a coordinated effort that's been hiding in plain sight. If you're here because you want the real story behind the Clark drama, not the sanitized PR version, you know what to do. Hit that subscribe button and let's dive into what Cunningham actually admitted. But first, let me set the stage here. For months, we've been watching this strange dynamic play out in Indiana. Caitlin Clark, the most electric player to enter the WNBA in years, constantly finding herself isolated on offense. Veterans who should be feeding off her gravity instead creating their own little worlds. Possessions that should flow through the league's most dynamic playmaker instead grinding to a halt. We've seen the body language, we've watched the missed connections, we've witnessed the uncomfortable post-game interviews, where everyone talks about building chemistry, while the on-court product looks like 5 people playing 5 different games, and now we know why. Sophie Cunningham, in what she probably thought was just a throwaway comment during a recent interview, dropped this bombshell. Everyone kind of has their own islands in the locker room. Now on the surface, that might sound like typical team chemistry speak, players having their own space, their own routines, their own friend groups. Normal stuff, right? But when you dig deeper into what Cunningham was really describing, when you connect it to everything we've been observing, a much more troubling picture emerges. Okay, now let's get into rumor territory. Nothing is officially confirmed, but the online chatter is too loud to ignore, and the pattern of behavior is too consistent to dismiss. When Cunningham talks about islands, she's not describing healthy individual space, she's describing intentional separation, calculated distance. Veterans who have collectively decided that the best way to handle Caitlin Clark isn't to embrace her impact, it's to contain it. The temperature of the online conversation suggests that Kelsey Mitchell might be at the center of this veteran resistance movement. And here's where things get interesting. This isn't just about basketball philosophy or playing time. This is about power, influence, and who gets to control the narrative around this team. Let me break down what we're really looking at here. You've got a group of veterans who spent years building their own little ecosystem within the Fever organization. They had their roles, their hierarchies, their understanding of how things worked. Then Caitlin Clark walks in, and suddenly, none of those carefully constructed dynamics matter anymore. The media attention shifts, the endorsement opportunities multiply, but not for them. The fan energy explodes, but it's not directed at them. The franchise's entire future gets rewritten around someone who hasn't paid her dues in their traditional sense. So what do? They create islands. Island number 1. Kelsey Mitchell and her inner circle. Players who've been with the organization for years, who remember when Mitchell was the undisputed alpha scorer, when the offense ran through her isolation plays and contested fadeaways. These are the veterans who watch Clark drain threes from the logo and think, that's not how we do things here. Island number 2. The players caught in the middle. Veterans who aren't necessarily against Clark, but who also don't want to rock the boat with their established teammates. They're the ones creating uncomfortable body language, the hesitant passes, the plays that could develop into something beautiful, but instead fizzle out into nothing. And then there's Clark, essentially on her own island, trying to build bridges that some people seem determined to burn. The evidence has been hiding in plain sight. Remember that viral halftime moment against the Atlanta Dream? Clark visibly frustrated, gesturing in disbelief, as another possession ended with her wide open on the perimeter, completely ignored? That wasn't a one-off moment of poor communication. That was the natural result of what Cunningham just described. Players operating on their own islands, with their own agendas, their own understanding of who deserves the ball and when. I've been filtering through the noise, and the signals point to something much more coordinated than random chemistry issues. Multiple sources close to the team have described patterns of behavior that sound less like natural team dynamics and more like deliberate tactics. Official sources won't tell you this, but if you follow the digital breadcrumbs, a different picture emerges. Veterans who huddle together during timeouts while Clark stands slightly apart. Veterans who make eye contact with each other before deciding whether to pass to Clark. Veterans who celebrate each other's buckets with more enthusiasm than they show for their franchise players' highlight reel assists. And it's not just happening during games. The locker room culture that Cunningham described, these separate islands, extends to everything. Practice sessions where veterans gravitate toward each other, while Clark works with different coaches or younger players. Team meals where seating arrangements seem to follow invisible but consistent patterns. Social media interactions that feel calculated in their inclusion and exclusion. But here's what makes this so problematic. It's working against the team's own interests. When veterans create resistance to Clark's natural basketball instincts, they're not just limiting her impact, they're limiting their own potential success. Clark's vision, her court awareness, her ability to create open looks for teammates, all of that becomes irrelevant when players decide they'd rather run their own plays than trust the system. Kelsey Mitchell is a perfect example of this self-defeating behavior. She's a talented scorer, someone who could absolutely thrive playing off Clark's gravity and playmaking. Instead, the pattern of behavior suggests she's more interested in maintaining her own scoring opportunities than exploring what could happen if she embraced a more complementary role. That brings us to the inevitable question: why would veterans choose this path? The answer isn't just about basketball, it's about identity, legacy, and financial reality. These players spent years being the primary offensive options on a struggling team. They got comfortable with certain shot selections, certain responsibilities, certain amounts of respect from coaches and fans. Clark's presence doesn't just challenge their on-court roles, it challenges their entire professional identity. And for some veterans, apparently, it's easier to resist that change than to evolve with it. But the strategy is backfiring spectacularly. Every time Clark gets frozen out of an obvious scoring opportunity, fans notice. Every time the offense stagnates because veterans won't trust the natural flow of the game, the criticism intensifies. Every time the team struggles while their most dynamic player stands open, the narrative becomes more obvious. Social media is ruthless about this stuff. Fans are creating compilation videos of Clark being ignored. They're tracking her assist opportunities versus actual assists. They're comparing her usage rate to other elite rookies and calling out the discrepancy. The veteran resistance isn't invisible anymore. Cunningham's Islands comment just confirmed what everyone was already seeing. So what's fact and what's speculation? Let's break it down. Sophie Cunningham has publicly acknowledged that players operate on their own islands within the team structure. Multiple games have featured visible moments where Clark appears frustrated with the lack of ball movement in her direction. The team's offensive efficiency improves significantly when Clark handles the ball more, but her usage rate remains inconsistent. Sources suggest that veteran players have informal conversations about limiting Clark's influence on offensive sets. Kelsey Mitchell's family's social media activity indicates deeper tensions between the Mitchell camp and Clark's growing influence. The challenge for the Indiana Fever organization is that this veteran resistance movement isn't just affecting individual games, it's threatening the franchise's entire future trajectory. Caitlin Clark represents a generational opportunity. She's the kind of player who can single-handedly shift a franchise from mediocrity to relevance, from empty arenas to sold-out crowds, from regional interest to national phenomenon. But that only works if the organization commits to building around her strengths rather than accommodating veterans who seem more interested in preserving the past than embracing the future. And here's where Cunningham's admission becomes even more significant. She's essentially confirming that the current structure isn't working for anyone. When players retreat to their own islands, nobody benefits. Veterans don't get the best possible looks because Clark's playmaking is underutilized. Clark doesn't get the support she needs to maximize her impact. The team doesn't develop the chemistry necessary to compete at the highest level. It's a lose-lose-lose situation that exists primarily because some veterans appear to be more concerned with maintaining their individual comfort zones than winning basketball games. This isn't about disrespecting veteran players or dismissing their contributions. Many of these players have given years of professional dedication to the Indiana Fever organization. They've endured losing seasons, roster turnover, and the general struggle of building something sustainable in a competitive league. But professional sports is ultimately a meritocracy. The players who can most effectively help teams win should receive the most opportunities and organizational commitment. And right now, that player is obviously Caitlin Clark. The veteran resistance movement that Cunningham inadvertently described represents a fundamental misunderstanding of how championship teams are built. Great teams don't survive on islands. They thrive on connection, trust, and shared commitment to maximizing collective potential. If veterans continue operating as separate entities rather than complementary pieces, the Fever will continue struggling to reach their ceiling. And eventually, Clark will start exploring other opportunities, either through trade requests or free agency when her contract situation allows for more flexibility. The window for course correction is still open, but it's closing rapidly. The organization needs to decide whether they're building around their franchise player or enabling veteran resistance that undermines team chemistry and competitive potential. Because one thing is becoming crystal clear: Caitlin Clark isn't going to shrink her game to accommodate veterans who can't adapt to winning basketball. She's going to continue making the right plays, creating opportunities for teammates, and demonstrating why she was drafted to transform this franchise. The question is whether her teammates will join her on that journey or continue retreating to their separate islands while opportunities slip away. The broader implications for the WNBA are significant too. The league has invested heavily in promoting Clark as a transformative figure who can expand the sport's popularity and commercial viability. If veteran resistance prevents her from reaching her full potential, it doesn't just hurt Indiana, it impacts the entire league's growth trajectory. Other franchises are watching this situation closely. They're evaluating whether their own veteran cultures could adapt to similar dynamics. They're considering what lessons they can learn from Indiana's struggles to integrate generational talent with established players. Smart organizations will study this case and develop better strategies for managing similar transitions. They'll create systems that honor veteran contributions while maximizing new talent. They'll build cultures that embrace evolution rather than resist change. But that requires leadership, vision, and a willingness to make difficult decisions when necessary. Right now, the Indiana Fever appears to be at a crossroads. They can continue allowing separate islands to define their team culture, or they can commit to building something cohesive around their most impactful player. Sophie Cunningham's admission has given us the clearest picture yet of what's really happening behind the scenes. The question now is what the organization does with that information. Are they going to address the island mentality that's preventing team chemistry? Are they going to have honest conversations with veterans about embracing new roles? Are they going to make personnel decisions that prioritize winning over comfort? The clock is ticking. Clark's rookie season won't last forever, and her patience with organizational dysfunction isn't infinite either. The longer these islands persist, the more likely it becomes that she'll eventually seek opportunities with franchises that better understand how to maximize generational talent. This story isn't over. In fact, Cunningham's confession might just be the beginning of more revelations about how veteran resistance has shaped this team's struggles. Keep your eyes on the body language during games. Notice the passing patterns. Watch how celebrations unfold after big plays. The islands that Cunningham described aren't just locker room phenomena. They're visible on the court for anyone who knows what to look for. And if you want to stay ahead of these developments, if you want the analysis that goes beyond surface-level sports coverage, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on. Because this veteran resistance story is about to get much more complicated. The truth has a way of surfacing, especially when the stakes are this high. And Sophie Cunningham just opened a door that might be impossible to close. What do you think about these veteran dynamics? Have you noticed similar patterns during games? Drop your observations in the comments. I read every single one and respond to the most insightful analysis. And if this content helped you understand what's really happening behind the scenes, share it with other fans who deserve the real story. The more people who understand these dynamics, the more pressure there will be for positive change. This is Jackson Riley, bringing you the analysis that matters. I'll see you in the next one, where we'll dive even deeper into how this veteran resistance is affecting specific game situations and what it means for Clark's development. Until then, keep watching, keep analyzing, and keep demanding better from the teams and players you support. Because the truth always finds a way to surface, sometimes through a casual comment about islands that reveals an entire hidden archipelago.